A lot of people want to work on improving their flexibility. And really the most important aspect of flexibility training is actually doing it. Developing flexibility is actually quite simple. You either use it or lose it. I try on this channel to make flexibility training as simple as possible. There's a whole selection of follow-along workouts for whatever it is that you want to work on. If you want to just sit back, put something on, and do your training. But there is a variety of ways that we can implement flexibility training into our practice. And I want to share with you a few different options to add minimal extra time to your training. The first way that we can add in flexibility training is simply by doing our strength movements through a larger range of motion. Flexibility training is essentially just developing strength through a range of motion. If we use more range, we also develop strength through that larger range. This one is literally the most time efficient way of adding flexibility training to your practice because you're already training. You don't need to do any extra work. You simply need to try and do that work through the largest range of motion that you can express. Not only will this improve your flexibility, but training through a full range of motion has actually been shown to improve the strength and hypertrophy gains that you get from your training. So ultimately, it's a pretty good bang for your buck. Some strength movements lend themselves better to developing range of motion than others. If we take something that is just like a posterior strengthening exercise, such as a deadlift versus Romanian deadlift, both are going to target roughly the same sort of movement, roughly the same sort of muscles, but certainly that Romanian deadlift is going to have a much larger degree of development of hamstring flexibility than a deadlift. Not saying they're the same, but if you want to choose one that's going to help develop range of motion and flexibility, the RDL is probably your best bet. Then we have something like a Jefferson curl, which is more on the end of the spectrum towards pure flexibility training. This one is much more focused on that hamstring range of motion, and you're going to be able to load this one at a much lower intensity, so it's going to develop strength to a much lesser degree. If you are going to add this sort of bias to flexibility training to your strength training, I would recommend performing this on your secondary and remedial exercises. Leave your primary movements to really max out and focus on getting strong. Then start implementing these flexibility elements to your backup exercises where doing the maximum amount of load isn't as important. Some other examples that are quite easy to implement in is something as simple as the push-up. If we elevate the hands and perform a deep push-up, we get to move the shoulders through a greater degree of shoulder extension. That's going to help stretch out the bicep and the pec and open up the shoulders a little bit further. To really max out the flexibility component of these movements, we can add pauses into this stretch position. This can be done on each rep, pausing in the bottom for 2, 3, 4 seconds, or by adding a longer pause duration at the end of the set, for example at the bottom of a chin-up to stretch out the lats and improve that overhead flexibility, as well as just doing our normal strength training. Performing lower intensity stretches in our rest periods is another incredible way to add flexibility training into your training routine with minimal extra time. When we're training, we're resting 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 minutes if we're working towards maximal strength. In fact, most of the time we're training, we're probably sitting around doing nothing, playing on your phone. Adding in some stretching, some flexibility work during this time is a great use of it. But I would just consider the fact that we want to make our flexibility training unrelated to the strength work we've done. If we've been doing some chin-ups, maybe let's work on some lower limb flexibility, such as developing the hip flexor and that hip extension. Because this is still a rest period, we want to use an exercise that is of lower intensity. Something like some passive stretching exercises, a position that we can just sit in and kind of pair a stretch with a movement. So we end up performing multiple sets of it to get a pretty good flexibility effect. The stretching, however, doesn't need to be completely unrelated. We can do stretches that complement our strength work. For example, stretching the pancake in between sets of training the press to handstand. Much like the first recommendation here, I probably would add this interset stretching into the secondary remedial exercises. I would leave those primary ones to focus on that max strength and add this in later on. The final option of this video, but certainly not the final option in general, of adding flexibility training into your practice is considering it as a modular add-on to your current training. If we're in the gym or if we're doing training already, we're already dedicating some time to add an extra 10 to 20 minutes of dedicated flexibility work is going to give you a lot of progress for not that much extra time. This is personally how I like to set up my own flexibility practice and what I use with clients to develop splits and those more advanced level movements. Simply, I would think about this not in the same way as interset stretching, but actually in relation to the session. If we're training upper body, then that's add in some heavier upper body flexibility, such as developing the bridge or the overhead position. If we're training lower body, then maybe add in some front splits, some middle splits, some pancake work. The options are really endless, but we want to treat this much the same as our main session. Do it for multiple sets and do it and treat it like strength training. I've covered this on many videos on this channel, and I'll link to some examples in the description down below. But that is a simple way to add flexibility to your training. You can use one or all of these methods. Really, it kind of doesn't matter. The main thing is that we stay consistent, we do the work, and ultimately good things will happen. If you want some more specific help, then you can always check out my app, in which we've just added a cooldown section for pretty much most routines now. So there's a little bit of flexibility work in all of them, no matter what you're working on. Other than that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. If you do have any, leave them in the comments section down below. You can also hit that thumbs up button. It really does help support the channel, show that you enjoyed these videos. And right next to it is that subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on any more future content and join the Bodyweight Warrior tribe. Other than that, hope you have a great one. Happy stretching. Oh, there's a whole selection of follow-alongs if you want to sit back. Oh, I lifted my foot up. Straight in the shot. Wicked. Okay. Lovely.